on ground. But the 2022 floods, which in fact began in Balochistan, my home province, began in June, not in July, when the national conversation began about the floods. This has revolved at the national level. The conversation has been, how can we convince the international community to do more for us on one pretext or another? What will convince them to give Pakistan more money? Nothing will. Why is the question? Because the Pakistani state has demonstrated what it thinks of its own citizens. Only when the state managers show that citizens' welfare is at the center of all governance and financial investment goals will anyone outside of Pakistan will consider helping us again. We will only then be in a position to ask for more help. But first, we must help ourselves. These floods of 22 have destroyed the lives of 33 million, but the impact will be felt across the nation, whether we want to acknowledge it now or later. The social and economic domino effects will reach our homes: food shortages, discontentment, uneven development, health and malnutrition crises. An extremely vulnerable population was made even more destitute. Who is to blame? Is the nature alone, climate change, responsible for this? Pre-floods, these very areas were extremely poor, with very little social safety systems, few schools, few health facilities, and extremely high illiteracy rates. Weak skills and even more vulnerable in terms of self-reliance. These were human social decisions. These were development goals allowed to exist. These conditions were never addressed. The Pakistani state has not invested in its population for 75 years, and at each humanitarian crisis, these vulnerabilities became starker, more apparent, and the cleavages widened. This time around, the rains and floodings occurred in the poorest regions of the country, where the weakest citizens can barely survive. From social safety systems absent, from local government to landlords on whose lands these tenants live, in an instant, their vulnerability multiplied. No population can be resilient without basic human rights investments in a multi-sectoral approach. To combat these, we need to make sure that the way forward is an integrated approach. To answer Munize's in terms of Balochistan, the financial assistance from the federal level, the NFC award to Balochistan is merely 315 billion Pakistani rupees for its 12.5 million population. That is 2,700 rupees per citizen. Does that make any sense? Does that build resilience? 2005 should have been a turning point. 2 decades later, we are in a worse condition. Apathy and the lack of good governance is the malaise Pakistan faces, but it is also the solution if we change it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nilofer, and we will get to our keynote speaker, the Federal Minister, Mr. Ehsan Iqbal, at the very end to deliver the keynote. And we know that almost 8 million people are displaced. Winters are fast approaching, and they will need homes. So let's go to Iza Farooq from the World Bank. And Iza, one of the things that you have worked on is the curriculum. It's on schools, it's on education. Now the World Bank their estimates are that directly as a consequence of the floods, poverty levels will increase from 2.5% to 4%. That's a considerable amount. How will these people then, already suffering poverty, will keep their children in school, and what should be done, what are the incentives, and how can the international community and the government of Pakistan help?
Thank you, Manize. I think that's a very, very important question, and sometimes we lose sight of long-term impact of disasters such as floods when we focus on, immediate recovery efforts. So just to reinforce what Manize said, a child born in Pakistan today is only 41% as productive as he or she could be. The human capital index for Pakistan is lower than expected for our income levels and is at the bottom of South Asia. Within Pakistan, there are regions that are at the global bottom of human capital. For instance, Balochistan and South Sindh, human capital levels are comparable to Niger. And children in the top districts, such as North Punjab, have double the human capital of children who are born in Balochistan or in rural Sindh. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. And just as we were recovering from COVID, what we are calling a crisis within a crisis, just recovering from COVID and then we are hit by floods, they are anticipated to have both immediate and long-term human impact, ranging from immediate disruption for millions of children and adolescents, estimates say about 2.4 million, and to associated long-term learning losses and human development in the future. And as we know, children who are at the intersection of multiple deprivations, girls with disabilities, come from the economically most vulnerable classes, are going to be disproportionately affected. Even before floods, we are all very conscious of the economic situation of the country, high rates of inflation, political instability. So, floods coming at this time really compounded the economic urgency that we are experiencing in Pakistan right now. And with a few exceptions, we know that calamity-hit districts already lagged in development indicators. Loss of lives, livelihoods, material assets from floods are going to have a transformational impact on affected learning communities. To go to what Manize was saying, just want to also show that when the 2005 and 2010 floods, after that, the first coping strategy of affected families was to pull their children out of school. Education is seen, especially in some parts of the country, as the first liability of human disasters. And what can be done? At this point in time, and Minister Iqbal Saab is a major champion of the out-of-school children agenda. There's depending on your source, anywhere between 18 and 21 million children are out of school right now. As a result of floods, we expect this number to increase disproportionately. What can be done? Immediate recovery needs focus on making sure that children have access to learning facilities. Temporary learning centers are being established. UNICEF has taken a lead on it. International development partners, local civil society organizations are collaborating with the government to set up these temporary learning centers. We just need to make sure that these learning centers provide safe learning spaces for the children and, provide them a kind of outlet as well. Psychosocial well-being needs to be taken care of, any PTSD suffered. And then, return to your actual schools is very important. So, we availed prefab classrooms in past emergencies. I think that's a really easy way to set up schools again. In areas where schools have complete damage, you rent buildings. I was told that in certain parts of South Punjab, schooling, up to 90% of schooling resumed in certain districts, such as Rajanpur and Rahim Yar Khan. That needs to be taken as a model, maybe lesson learning across provinces. And while there needs to be focus on retrofitting, rehabilitating schools, making sure that there's complete focus on getting children back to school, back to learning, there's also some innovative approaches that the government can deploy, public-private partnerships, for example, availing the functional private schools, giving out-of-school children vouchers until they're available to go back to their own schools. Working with the private sector, giving low-interest loans. A third of Pakistan's children go to low-fee private schools. And, they compete, especially in provinces like Punjab, very closely to the public education sector. So availing that for, to make sure that there's education continuity. Learning losses. There's a term called learning poverty, which basically measures whether a child at age 10 can read and understand a simple text. At Pakistan, before COVID, learning poverty was at 75%. This accounts for children who are schooling deprived and children who are in school and are learning deprived. This is expected to increase by 5 percentage points because of the flood. So it's going to go to 80%. So how do we address learning poverty? Manize spoke about the curriculum. Pakistan probably has the most the most dense curriculum when even compared to developing countries. How can we really focus on what are the essential learning outcomes for children and focus on those when supporting learning recovery? How do we train our teachers to make sure that when children come back to school, they're provided a safe, welcome learning space? And these are very important. How do we make our schools inclusive? The whole concept of building back better. When children come to school, they should find their schools happy, welcoming spaces. This is an opportunity for us to make schools more inclusive, to ensure that, there's room for children who were previously deprived from schooling because of a physical or a mental handicap. Establishing monitoring and tracking systems. This is very, very essential when it comes to floods, right? Making sure that there's transparent, merit-based contracts given out either by the CNW department or by the education department to make sure that you get good value for money, safe construction practices. If infrastructure is being enhanced, to make sure that the foundation is being strengthened. Competitive procurements, these are all very important. And in the long term, right, you really need to think of DRM, disaster risk management, and climate resilience as a core part of district education plans, provincial education plans, a DRM focus in line departments, coordination with your district disaster management authorities. And like I said earlier, really doubling down on the out-of-school agenda that Minister Saab is championing. The non-formal education sector will play a really important role for children who have been out of school for a certain number of months, allowing them access to non-formal education systems that are certified and allow re-entry into the formal education system. A system for, transition of late entrance into school, early childhood education. So our mandatory education starts at age 5. But we all know that early years are the most important in a child's growth. The brain develops at a stage that is unparalleled in later years. It is at these years that you develop the skills, the coping mechanisms that not only form the foundation for later year learning, but also for coping with personal, professional setbacks. And the earlier, the more you invest in early years, they say that, for instance, your pre-primary school teacher is the most important teacher in your life. So just really focusing on the early years as well.
Right.
So these are some of the,
Right.
These are some of the recommendations.
These are very important points to begin with. Thank you very much. And when I was traveling around Balochistan, especially in the flood-hit areas, one of the hopeful things that I saw was little girls and boys going to school. The school buildings had survived, and she would get up from a room that had, completely destroyed because of the floods, and would wear her school bag and her neat uniform and go to school. So these are the glimmers of hope I've seen in Balochistan, and we'll stay with Balochistan because it is definitely the most underdeveloped province in Pakistan and needs more attention, and therefore I'll ask Mr. Shah Murad Aliani to speak after this. I have already introduced him. You are part of a local NGO. We are now being told by the Baloch that NGOs were not given NOCs. There were some NGOs that were not given no objection certificates, and therefore the relief and the rehabilitation effort they could not carry out. What is the situation on the ground, and has that affected your efforts? And secondly, how can rebuilding be inclusive of women in those areas where women are confined to their homes?
Thank you. First of all, I'd just like to say it's a privilege to be here. I realize post-lunch sessions can be a bit boring, so I'll try to speed it up. Look, I don't work for an NGO. I work with a local NGO. It's a local NGO that has capacity in ecosystem restoration. And we've been working with the local administration quite seamlessly. We have not encountered any issues so far. Having said that, let me clarify, working in Las Bela district, and like I said earlier, everything has been pretty okay in terms of not having any hindrances. Now somebody's mic is on. We predominantly, we've predominantly been working under the radar, so to speak. We're a small outfit, we're quite driven. And with regard to your question about gender inclusion, we're very aware of that, and we have included several interventions within our model which address gender inclusion. One is that we are proposing, in fact, we're talking to Dow Medical College. We want to have females, whomever is willing, have trained for midwifery, so that look after people. Hello? They can look after their community in terms of prenatal, delivery, and postnatal services. And we are also, the area where we're working on, unlike Sindh, you have a lot of scattered households. Everything is not clumped together, it's quite scattered. So what we want to do is we want to have a community center, one for females, one for males. And we've talked to a foundation that is going to be giving sewing machines to the women there so that they can work, they can make garments not only for their own purpose, also market. Because of cultural because of cultural difficulties, it is somewhat difficult again to be able to access women, but I believe we have a solution and we're working towards that.
What you're suggesting is that there should be homegrown industries, cottage industries that should be encouraged in these areas where women are not encouraged to come out and work.
Okay, well, look, you have to understand that in Balochistan, women don't get out and work unless, they only work within their area, and which is fine. We have to be, cognizant of cultural norms. What we're doing is we're putting up what we think is a very comprehensive, sustainable village model. Our emphasis is on resilience. It's on livelihoods diversification. We tend to look towards external forces for help, and we have a different approach. We think that we need to help ourselves. We need to make our people resilient. We need to give them the capacity and empower them so that they can look after themselves, which is the whole basis of our intervention, the Sustainable Village Intervention. It has many facets. I don't know if we have time for any of those. If you'd like me to elaborate on them, I'd be happy to do so.
All right, thank you very much. We'll come back to that. And since you're talking about building back better, we have Mr. Bilal Anwar, and I've introduced him. He's the CEO of the National Disaster Risk Management Fund. One of the questions I'll be asking you is, how do we build back better? How do we make Pakistan more resilient? We've been through the earthquakes. We've been through the floods in 2010. Have we learned? Have you seen that on the ground? Have we learned? And how can we make Pakistan more friendly towards climate change?
Yeah, well, First of all, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. And since I'm speaking for the first time, I'll just take 30 seconds to introduce NDRMF, National Disaster Risk Management Fund. This is a federal government entity which is registered as a Section 4042, and which is mandated to build resilience Pakistan against natural and other disasters, just like one in which we are right now. Now, yes, I mean, about building back better, and you're absolutely right that Pakistan has a long history of dealing with disasters.